Hey everyone and welcome back to another video. Blizzard think they've went too far. They've said this. Ian Hazzikostas literally said this in regards to what they've done with classes and the pruning. He said that classes are the lens through which you play the game. And that if the classes are bad, that because the class is the lens through which you play the game, well, a bad class is pretty much going to ruin the enjoyment of the game for many people. And that they are beginning to agree with that, and that they thank people for their feedback. And that is very interesting to hear indeed. There's quite a lot to get into here. There's some very interesting comparisons with Classic and with Live, spec identity versus class identity, and then also the fact that, yeah, we've literally heard a lot of these words before, but there is one kind of key difference this time around, and I think that's the thing we'll start with. So, we've heard Blizzard say they think they've went too far. We've been hearing that since, I believe, October, and then sporadically in interviews before that, just about things like class pruning. But that has typically not really happened in a super pre-prepared way. It's been things like the developer Q&As. Well, this comes from the Developer Insights video for patch 8.2 that was pre-recorded by Ian. And that does mean that they have control of the final edit. If they don't like something he ended up saying, they can take it out. So this is very much something that they have went on the record with. And they've not only just went on the record talking to Forbes or something like that, they've done it in the video they posted at the same time that they posted the 8.2 trailer. They've done it in something that essentially is a bit of marketing material for the 8.2 patch. So the fact that they've said these things in such a high-profile, prominent way, we could see that as a pretty large public commitment, and that's why I think it's important to talk to you about that today. So yes, Ian said they think they went too far in prior expansions, and that they were too focused on their measure of complexity and all of that, just being the number of buttons. Even though, and this is an example that he talked about, there were things like, say, alter time. Now, alter time, that could be used very well, or it could blow up in your face and get you killed, which meant that it was a really cool button. Okay, it had niche uses, it wasn't bound all the time, and perhaps because they just saw that wasn't a commonly bound button, they thought, we'll remove the button. And that's something that I think just about everyone who plays World of Warcraft has an example of, right? Something in your class that ended up being killed. Now, sure, from a hunter's perspective, I still miss the days of patch 5.2 and readiness, and our crazy openers, and I get how some of that may have been a bit OP, but broadly speaking, yeah, I think we all have examples of some buttons that Blizzard just pruned away. So that's the first thing that he talked about, and I think it's very good that he talked about that. He said that they'll be looking to reintroduce some buttons in the future, and I think for me, it's less about reintroducing old buttons, and it's more that they maybe feel free to have just more niche buttons in the future and new designs, so that's definitely a good thing. But that's not all though, because he did talk about something that I have really been feeling a lot lately, right? And that is spec identity over class identity. And there's a few different times where I've felt this, and I think it's an interesting insight. So when I was doing my class reviews for this patch, it really revealed to me something about the way that they're designing the game. And that was the first time that I felt it. And then the next time was playing Classic again. And the first thing that really strikes you with Classic is, I'm a mage. I'm not a fire mage, I'm not a frost mage, I'm not an arcane mage, I'm a mage. I'm a mage who's customizing, and I'm choosing which abilities from those schools of magic I want, but I'm a mage. Whereas right now, a fire mage is a fire mage, a frost mage is a frost mage. Their gameplay styles are entirely different. And that really is something that's been a big point of change. I think World of Warcraft has moved towards that more and more and more over time, to the point where really everyone plays 3 classes per character. That's just how different they are. But what's really happened, and this is kind of odd because Ian talked about the idea of, well, we could make some more abilities just generic and allow for more hybridization. He talked about thinking that hybridization is a strength, is a good thing, is fun, that people enjoy that, and I definitely agree with him. But I would almost say that at this stage, because buttons are less designed to just be a button, and they're designed to be a part of a very, very tightly designed cycle that provides a very specific gameplay aesthetic for that spec, that, well, the specs are just designed in such a specific way that I actually don't know if it's even possible to do that. But still, the fact that he was talking about that is, I think, super, super important. It reveals a lot of core differences between the current game and, I'd say the current game, Mists of Pandaria, Cataclysm, and Classic. And I guess if I was to really boil that down, there is Now, there is MoP, there is Classic. Those are like points of just extremes in class design and how they've all been so very different. So when I was going back and I was doing those class reviews, right, for this expansion, I kind of found that I was reviewing every spec in isolation because that was the format of the video. You go through each spec for each class, you give your thoughts on them. But I've actually found that a lot was missing in those videos, kind of because of the format. Because what I was doing is I was sitting down and I was thinking, Outlaw Rogue. Okay, here is the rotation of Outlaw Rogue. It's very tightly designed. I'm here in a target dummy. I'm doing a few dungeons. I really have a good grasp of the designer's intent with this small little gameplay loop. But the thing is, that was kind of that. So within the bounds of my video, I'd just be saying, yeah, you know, within what they're trying to do here, this fire mage feels like a fire mage. This frost mage feels like a frost mage. We've got some decently impactful talent choices. Okay, yeah, all seems good. But doing that format entirely misses out a lot of the reason why a class is played. And this is, I think, what's really important, because I was sitting down there thinking, is this engaging gameplay, these buttons, right? Can I just sit down on a target dummy and, you know, do all my stuff? And I'll be like, yeah, okay, this is pretty good. But that's really missing out on the experience of playing a mage for 3 weeks and feeling like a damn mage. And that's really the thing that I think they've been missing. So hearing Ian talk about that is absolutely a fantastic thing to hear. And that really is the contrast between now and between Classic, and even, you know, now and, say, Cataclysm, where, of course, we, in Cataclysm, had a slightly pared down version of the old talent system that still fundamentally was like the old talent system, though, of course, Blizz were not that happy with it because they did, of course, the next expansion, turn that into the Mists of Pandaria one. And I suppose when we're talking about all of these expansion to expansion differences, this brings up another, I think, very, very interesting topic. So I'm not going to name any names, actually, because I've forgotten who it was, but I saw somebody on Twitter talking about people being angry at current class design and really also liking vanilla a lot. And this really does bring me on to the topic of the differences between the eras of World of Warcraft, where I've seen a lot of people sort of say that there's a lot of hypocrisy going on because people simultaneously are liking the idea of Classic and also liking the idea of Mists of Pandaria. Now, of course, if you compare Mists of Pandaria gameplay to Classic gameplay, they're pretty darn different. Mists of Pandaria was the fastest World of Warcraft has ever been. Just the number of buttons you would have. Now, okay, thinking about a simple example, even just being a hunter with a mechanic like recklessness that would reset your, or not recklessness, readiness, that would reset your cooldowns. That meant that your opener was a decently complex thing that, of course, Blizzard ended up removing because of the complexity. You've got things like the snapshotting, right, on a warlock, which is part of what made them so powerful. But in general, just people had more tools. They had more things to play with. The pruning, right? The pruning that kicked off with Warlords of Draenor and continued into Legion and continued into Battle for Azeroth, and then, of course, also had the global cooldown stuff, that hadn't happened yet. So that meant that I would say, as like the peak of modern-ish era WoW gameplay, Mists of Pandaria was totally up there. Now, Mists of Pandaria is when I think World of Warcraft was super engaging gameplay-wise. You could sit down and those classes were pretty deep. There was a lot you could do in different scenarios, and learning and mastering a class really did feel kind of fantastic. But it was still quite designed. It was still, you know, it still felt like modern WoW, I would say. Just that, you know, the current version just feels like a far worse version of that. But if you go way back to Classic, well, that's very different because you've got loads of buttons in Classic, but you've got loads of obtuse mechanics. And you've got those buttons not really being designed to work together in a rotation. And I think that's a really big thing. Now, a rotation is designed by a gameplay designer to be satisfying, to have a good rhythm. Look at a fire mage, look at a frost mage, right? It's all designed around rhythm, whereas back in the day, what was a rotation? I mean, I'm sure the designers tried to think of what the rotation would be, but the rotation would far more feel like, oh, it's someone from the elitist jerks forum. And they've kind of worked out the mathematical best way to use this bizarre janky toolkit that your class has, and how that works with other people's, janky toolkits. And then you come together and you form a team. And I think that's a lot of what made just a kind of a good bonding experience with the limited mechanics that the classes had. And honestly, they're pretty jank designs. I mean, let's be real. Vanilla was no way perfect in class design, right? But what's interesting, I suppose, is now a lot of those elitist jerks forum posters are actually the people designing the classes. And you can really see a sort of shift in design mentality. A lot of those older abilities were just abilities thrown into the game that, I mean, yeah, they had a place in a broader picture of a class or a spec, but I suppose there were far fewer implicit assumptions in the design of those classes. Why do I say that? Well, the second you choose a fire mage, you're locked into a gameplay loop, and you have all of the abilities for that loop. Whereas in the old talent system and the old way the classes worked, you very much would just be picking and choosing things here and there. And for the designers, it was less about how do we just make a fire mage have this perfectly crafted loop of gameplay second to second, and it was more about what interesting sort of tools and decisions can we give the player, and then they work out the rotation for themselves. So I think that's a really key differentiator between the schools of design thought that have really led to the classes being the way that they are. Now, I don't think we should go back to the classic version for World of Warcraft. One of the reasons why is Classic exists. If you want that, you can go and play Classic. I would far rather us go more towards the Mists of Pandaria way of things, because modern WoW, for better or worse, it's modern WoW, and I don't think that retrofitting Classic into modern WoW would exactly be the best thing to do directly in terms of the class design. I mean, actually, if we're being real, there are some slowdown elements from Classic that Blizzard have tried to bring into modern WoW, and they haven't really worked. So let's take a great example, dehomogenization. Okay, so bring the player, not the class. See, this is great. I was around whenever I was listening to Blue Please episodes where Total Biscuit was ranting about bring the player, not the class. That was the good old days. But that was a big change, because way back in Classic or Vanilla and TBC, classes were not well-rounded in their utility toolkits. But then over time, Blizzard kind of thought, you know what? No matter what class Jeff is bringing, Jeff should be able to come to the raid. So they just made sure that whatever Jeff's class was, it pretty much had all the utility you could possibly need. And that's kind of how they designed the game. Bring the player, not the class. But then what do you see? And I mean, maybe the height of bring the player, not the class is Mists of Pandaria in a way where everyone is just an absolute superhero with so much power. Now, sure, there were still things like, as a hunter, I could, use, I can't believe this, old aspect of the turtle. Oh, how embarrassing. Cheese mechanics, a paladin could do that as well. Not everyone could do that, but still, everyone was super powerful. But then over time, you will have noticed in WoD, in Legion, in BFA, what did Blizzard do? They tried to take away your utility. And the reason why they try to take your utility away is, and they said this at the time, because they liked how it forced team play. And they liked how it forced team play in the past. It's clear that that's not really something that the current players of the game really want. The current very mechanically focused players of the game. It's clearly not something that they want. And I think that's totally fine. And I think that means that instead, World of Warcraft should be trying to not exactly be like Mists of Pandaria, but try to understand why Mists of Pandaria was so well loved by people who enjoyed the classes of WoW and the gameplay that came there. So really, I think it should be about providing that level of depth, allowing for mechanics like Warlock snapshotting or Alter Time for the mages, which was the example that Ian brought up. I think that's really where we should be going. And if they're going to do that in the next expansion, I think that could really improve the game. So I think the slowdown, definitely a bit of an issue. The GCD changes, big issue. I think that's something they'll need to walk back in the next expansion. Let's be real. If Ian was to walk out and say, yeah, sorry about the GDC thing, bit embarrassing, we've undone it, people would be happy. Now, it's unfortunate that they're only happy because Blizzard subjected them to gameplay they didn't like for 2 years, but still, people would be happy. So if they were to do that in combination with more mop-like class design, you know, giving people a few new bells and whistles for their class, things that are actually for their class or spec and are not dictated by an external progression system like the heart, like the artifact, I think people will be really happy. And then there is the topic, and this is something I'm so glad he brought up, of class over spec or spec over class, and the idea that, you know, you're not a hunter, you're a survival hunter. I think it would be great if they could just start having more class level things. I did bring up the idea of having class masteries as kind of like a talent point system that would exist on top of the current one, which would be stuff designed for your class. So that just the bread and butter of existing as a hunter would be different from the bread and butter of existing as a mage in a way that would really work for class identity. So I think something like that would be a really cool system in the future. But broadly speaking, I really like what he talked about. As I said in the start of the video, they have said these things before and then just not done them. But they did say this in a big official video that was right beside the main trailer for a patch. It seems pretty intentional. And right now it's 8.2, so they really are going to be kicking off the next expansion's full development process right around now. So, you know, they're kicking that off. They're saying this. That all does seem like a pretty good thing. But that is not where we're going to stop today, because we do have one more topic. And that topic is Essence Catch-Up. So basically, you get the new essences in the next patch, right? And I think one thing that a lot of players, myself included, have been pretty bummed out about in the past with WoW is just the feeling that everything's pointless. Now, way back in Wrath of the Lich King, you know, I got my item level 200, I got my nice sword from King Yearman, and, you know, that was a good sword. Trial is bringing me up to like 232, and you were maybe, 264 for 25 ICC. The item level difference was not that big, and that still meant that just, you know, your gear always felt pretty meaningful. Whereas right now, we essentially, let's be real, we have an expansion-sized gear reset every 4 months. And that does make me feel like I can't progress my character right now before 8.2 comes out. And being real with you, maybe 3 months into 8.2, I'm going to feel like there's no point progressing my characters because 8.3 is just going to undo it all anyway. So that's something that I think there's been a lot of criticism about. Well, in regards to the essence catch, or the essences that you're going to be earning in this patch, Ian said that they're not going to be superseded. There's not going to be a catch-up system for them. The essences are the essences. Your work now is not going to be trivialized in the future. They may add new essences, but they're not going to add a bunch of new essences and then just, you know, give you a vendor where you can purchase the current ones. There's not going to be a catch-up system. That's really good to hear, because that means that if I start a new character 3 months into this next patch, maybe I don't feel like I'm really going to be gaining if I progress my character's gear all that much, because I know it'll be reset, but I at least know all these essences, if I work in them now, they will stand to my character for the duration of this expansion. That is where the game needs to be. And even though it is not game-wide and is just within the bounds of the Essence system, it's good to hear that they understand that. So, where does this video leave us? Honestly, it leaves us nowhere concrete, because these are just words. We need to see those words turn into action. What I will say is this. I like the sounds he's making. I like the things he's talking about. The direction, right? If they're moving in that direction more, that would be a good thing. I think the comparisons between MoP and Classic and today are super interesting, and I think we can learn the right lessons from all of those things and move forward in a way that will genuinely make WoW a hell of a lot better. Fundamentally, it's what Ian said. The class, you know, your class, your character, it's the lens through which you view the game, you play the game. If your class just kind of sucks and you don't feel like there's that much depth, it's going to reduce the enjoyment of every other system in the game. The fact that they know that, the fact they're making big public noises about that, very good thing indeed. So, I want to end this video by asking you, what would you like to see for your class, for your spec? Let's say you're a mage. I want to know, what things do you want for your favorite spec? But I also want to know, what things would you like for your entire class, that your whole class gets, that would bolster that class identity? That's what I want to hear down in the comments. So, bit of a long video, super interesting topic. I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching this video. And with that, I shall see you next time.